stuff. What about, say, longitude and latitude navigation? How are we having whole industries of pilots flying around and no one's really catching on?
Yeah, I mean, here's a good question. Why don't pilots catch on to this fact? If the Earth was truly a sphere, 25,000 miles in circumference, curvating 8 inches per mile squared, a pilot who wanted to simply maintain their altitude at a typical cruising speed of 500 miles per hour would have to constantly dip their nose downwards and descend 2,777 feet over half a mile every minute. Otherwise, without this compensation, in an hour's time, the pilot would find themselves 166,666 feet, 31.5 miles higher than expected. You just end up flying off into outer space if you weren't constantly dipping your nose down to fly around the ball. And so, like I said, if at the typical cruising speed of most planes, you'd have to be descending half a mile every single minute. And this never happens. I've talked to pilots. Once you get to your cruising altitude, the artificial horizon maintains level. It don't touch the controls, just keeps on going. And so, I mean, the reason pilots don't figure, I'm sure some pilots figure it out, and then who are they going to tell? I mean, they're just like everyone else. Everyone else is so brainwashed that they don't think of it. And if they do, I've even heard some explanations. They claim that, they say the atmosphere, they say the Earth is spinning out over 1,000 miles per hour, and that the atmosphere is also dragged along with it. So then, if some pilot says, hey, why don't I have to course correct downwards all the time? Their explanation is that this atmosphere that's being magically dragged with the spinning ball Earth also magically course corrects planes so that they stay at exactly the same altitude because they're in that atmosphere, that magical atmosphere that helps you curve around the ball Earth, man. They've got explanations for everything.
Mm-hmm. And we're told that the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, which is awfully fast, but yet, let's say a helicopter cannot just hover in the air for 12 hours, start in St. Louis, Missouri, hover for 12 hours and land in China with the Earth spinning below it. And that is what, I would first think would be the situation. But then we're told because we're in the sphere, it all moves relative to itself and you don't notice those changes. And see, I'm not a physicist, I'm not a pilot, and so it's hard for me to really play devil's advocate for their position. But I think about if you're in a speeding car going 90 miles an hour down the highway, you can play catch with the passenger and it feels like you're stationary. Or like if an ant is crawling around on your dashboard, whether it's going with the grain of the car or against, it doesn't really notice that effect. So it's like, I guess I would think that the atmosphere would have the same effect as the encapsulation of that vehicle moving at a fast speed. To the people inside of it, they don't notice. And I guess that's the argument. But do you find flaws with that argument?
Yeah, because once again, it's explaining away your common sense and your experience, which is that you're not moving whatsoever. And so they say, yes, you are moving, silly, but you're just moving at such a constant velocity that you don't notice it whatsoever. Now, even if you're in the best Rolls Royce over the best tar, smoothly going, you close your eyes, I can still tell I'm moving, and that's not going 1,000 miles per hour, that's just going 50 or whatever we're talking about here.
Let's see what coming fast. Okay. Let's keep it at 20. Ready? Bear in mind we're 4 ahead of us.
Even in an elevator, just an elevator going up, I can feel that. I have a really sensitive stomach, so I mean, I can tell and I get sick if I'm doing some sort of motion that's anything on par with what the Earth is supposedly doing. And so isn't that weird that just because it's a perfect constant velocity that my stomach's able to handle that, but just a little bit of a elevator malfunction and then I'm ready to, So these things don't make any sense. They just want to explain away your common sense with these kind of arguments. And like you said, if you were in a helicopter, you should be able to just go up, wait for the ball Earth to spin underneath you and land at your destination. But of course, the atmosphere spins with the ball Earth, so that doesn't happen. But we can prove that that's not the case either, because now we have airplanes which you can go easterly or westerly, and if the Earth and the atmosphere are spinning 1,000 miles per hour east all the time, as they say, then a westbound plane should be, well, an eastbound plane should never reach its destination. If it was going 500 miles per hour and the Earth is spinning and the atmosphere is spinning 1,000 miles, your destination should come up behind you before you ever reach it, right? And then destinations going the opposite way are going to take far, far longer than they do. You can check flight times, and they're always within a half hour, a couple hours, no matter what direction you're going to or from. But if the Earth was actually spinning at the rate that they say it was, flight times would be totally different.
It makes sense, but yet I've been taught from an early age not to trust myself because they've got it on lock. So I just assume that the physics all kind of works out. But I know there are people who go to school for physics. You know, they study it for years and years. And it's just odd that none of them ever catch on to it. That I guess that guys like Newton created this entire fake science around a fake model, and yet all the math checks out. That's a little hard for me to rectify.
Well, they're counting on that. That's why they've got all these huge formulas and calculations for gravity and whatnot that are based on nothing. So, like, they've got a weight for the ball Earth, all based on their gravity calculations. And you can Wikipedia it, and you'll see pages of, mathematic language that makes no sense to 99.9% of the population. But apparently the math works out, so it's real, right? So it's just another way, just like the CGI images or whatever. Some people are fooled by the images. Some people are fooled by the math. Some people are fooled by, this or that. They've got many different ways to get us in their grips. Like you said, the whole education system is teaching us not to believe our senses. Like the model they show, the ball Earth model with a crust on the outside and the outer mantle and the inner mantle and the outer core and the inner core. Guess what? They've only ever dug 8 miles down into the crust, so they don't even know what's beneath that. It took them almost 30 years to get there, and they couldn't get any further in the Russian Kola Ultra Deep, it's called. So it's all speculation as to these layers of the ball Earth they claim exist, and it's the inner layer of molten magnetic core, whatever they claim, creates the magnetism of the Earth. And so this is another funny thing. They claim that the core that we've never gotten to, so that can't be confirmed existed, causes a magnetic effect on the ball Earth, so that at one point at the top of the ball is a pole, and at the exact opposite point on the ball is an opposite magnetic pole. But this doesn't exist anywhere in nature. You can't find a sphere, and at one point on the magnetic sphere, it will cause another magnetic sphere to stick to it in that little point, and then and then push away from the opposite point. It doesn't exist like that. Only bar magnets can do that. What do exist, however, are ring magnets, and those are shaped just like the flat Earth model, where the pole is in the middle, and then the opposite pole is actually every point along the circumference. So the magnetic explanation, which a lot of people will bring up, well, how does magnetism work if we're on a flat Earth? The accepted model is that it's this spinning molten magnet stuff in the core that creates this kind of north-south ball magnet, which doesn't actually exist anywhere in nature. Yet the ring magnet, which is it's in loudspeakers and other things, that's the flat Earth model, and that actually does exist. So that's an actual magnet instead of an imaginary magnet like they claim exists. And we'll actually admit that I don't know what's under the flat Earth. We've only gone 8 miles down, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of the Pacific. All I know is, as far as we can tell, the water is completely flat, and the land is flat, other than hills, valleys, and mountains over a long period of space. There's no convex or concave curvature. It's totally flat.
Yeah, and I guess you could say science is designed exactly how economics and taxes are designed. The increasing complexity makes it so the average individual just has to trust the experts. You can follow it to a certain point, but then most people say, well, that's a little bit beyond me, but there's experts out there. They know what they're doing. I'm sure that this fractional reserve banking system, this debt-based system of rule is just fine. I'm sure the taxes I'm paying are totally fair. They've got the code. They got the big book. They wouldn't overcharge me. They wouldn't, pull any scams on me. And you could apply the same thing to, of course, science, but it's just to what degree? This is a really far out degree.
That's right, yeah. I mean, our eyes and experience tell us the Earth is flat and motionless and everything in the sky revolves around us. But when we cease to believe our own eyes and experience, we have to prostrate ourselves at the feet of these very pseudoscientists who are blinding us, treat them as experts, astronomical priests who have special knowledge only they can access, like the Hubble telescope. So by brainwashing us of something so gigantic and fundamental, it actually makes every other kind of lesser indoctrination a piece of cake. Earth being the flat, fixed center of the universe around which everything in the heavens revolves gives a special importance and significance not only to Earth, but to us humans, the most intelligent among the intelligent designers' designs. By turning Earth into a spinning ball thrown around the sun and shot through infinite space from a godless Big Bang, they turn humanity into a random, meaningless, purposeless accident of a blind, dumb universe. So it's like trauma-based mind control, beating the divinity out of us with their mental manipulations. People are always asking, why do they do this? Other than the obvious profit margin motive, NASA being the biggest black budget black hole in existence, sucking in over $30 billion taxpayer money for the fake moon landings alone. Nowadays, hundreds of billions of dollars, and not just NASA, but RASA and all the other fake space organizations around the world, giving CGI images for hundreds of billions of dollars. So this modern atheist Big Bang heliocentric globe Earth chance evolution paradigm spiritually controls humanity by removing God or any sort of intelligent design and replaces purposeful divine creation with haphazard random cosmic coincidence. And so by removing Earth from the motionless center of the universe, these Masons have moved us physically and metaphysically from a place of supreme importance to one of complete nihilistic indifference. If the Earth is the center of the universe, then the ideas of God, creation, and a purpose for human existence are resplendent. But if the Earth is just one of billions of planets revolving around billions of stars and billions of galaxies, then the ideas of God, creation, and a specific purpose for Earth and human existence become highly implausible. So by surreptitiously indoctrinating us into their scientific materialist sun worship, not only do we lose faith in anything beyond the material, we gain absolute faith in materiality, superficiality, status, selfishness, hedonism, and consumerism. If there's no God and everyone's just an accident, then all that really matters is me, me, me. So they've turned Madonna and the mother of God into the material girl living in a material world. Their rich, powerful corporations with their slick sun cult logos sell us idols to worship, slowly taking over the world while we tacitly believe their science, vote for their politicians, buy their products, listen to their music, watch their movies, all sacrificing our souls at the altar of materialism.
Touche, my man.
It's a big deception. I'd say it's the biggest cover-up and conspiracy in history. We've been completely deluded for 500 years. Not everybody, but nowadays it's pretty well advanced.
Yeah.
Most of the flat Earth material you'll find still in existence is from the 1800s, and there was quite a debate going on then. So there's still quite a few people unconvinced of the spinning ball theory back then. But nowadays with NASA and all the photo and videos that they give us, people don't really look at too much further for evidence, as they assume that that's all real.
Right. Obviously, it is a huge can of worms, and there's so many things, so many arguments. People say, well, what about, the planets? Are the planets are all fake? Yeah, there's a lot of things that our science has told us that are built off of the heliocentric model that they've given us. And I think that if there's any unanswered questions by the time we're done here, if people go online and take their question and they look it up on either the comment section of your website, or I was very surprised to see how many people really are questioning the heliocentric model online. I thought it would be far less, but if you take the question you may have and you ask it to the so-called experts on the idea, they will have an answer for you. And I guess I would say, challenge yourself to try to stump one. Challenge yourself to try to come up with something that they can't explain, and then say it's bullshit. But until then, maybe you should keep an open mind. And before we do go too far into it, give us a clear mental picture, if you can, of what you consider the true model of the Earth and the cosmos and this whole thing to be. Because obviously we're calling in the question that there are not billions of stars. There are not a bunch of planets in the solar system orbiting the sun. That's a huge ball of wax. So what is this reality? How is it structured?
So if you look up at the sky with your eyes or with a telescope, you can't tell the difference between a star and a planet. The planets were always known as wandering stars, and the regular stars as fixed stars for thousands of years. Nowadays, they claim that planets are Earth-like spherical terra firma that you can walk on up there in outer space. But as far as you can tell through any telescope that we have, it's just a round dot of light up there in the sky. All the planets and all the stars, none of them can be confirmed to be some sort of terra firma that you could land on, though in their pictures from their fake telescopes, they clearly look like big ball planets that you could definitely land on, as they show you with Mars and whatnot. But that can't be confirmed, again, with your own eyes or with a telescope that you could buy. With anything that we can see, the sun, moon, stars, and planets are all just lights in the sky revolving around us. They claim that we revolve around the sun, and the moon revolves around us, and the stars are actually distant suns trillions upon trillions of miles away. Now, this wasn't always that way. They've actually been reverse engineering these explanations as they go along, because geocentric flat earthers throughout the centuries have come up with good objections, such as Tycho Brahe's objection that if the Earth is a ball spinning around the sun, in 6 months' time we should be 200 million miles on the other side of the sun. So the parallax perspective, when you look through a telescope in your backyard, you can prove this, you should see some difference in the stars after 200 million miles of supposed orbit. But you can't see any whatsoever. So what heliocentrists have been saying since then is that the stars are actually, the nearest star is 25 trillion miles away, 4.2 light years. They came up with a sci-fi term to make it seem plausible. It's light years away. It's so far away that even after 200 million miles, you can't see an inch of difference in your backyard through a telescope after 6 months of supposed orbital motion. The reason that they say the ball Earth is tilted on its vertical axis 23.5 degrees is because you can see Polaris, the North Pole star, all the way to 23.5 degrees south latitude. And if the Earth was a ball, you couldn't see that because you'd be staring through the ball to look up at that star. You can see it because the Earth is flat, of course, but you can't see all the stars at any one place from the Earth because of the law of perspective. That's why the sun seems to rise and fall in the sky every day as well, but it's actually not rising or falling anywhere. The sun and the moon maintain their altitude, and they revolve circles around the flat Earth. So we're stationary. The sun and the moon are actually the same size, just as they appear. There's another lie. They claim that the sun is 400 times bigger and 400 times further away than the moon, and that's why they just appear the same size from our perspective, but they're not. But I mean, again, with your own eyes, you can see when they eclipse, they are the same size. And the fact that they do eclipse is not quite a coincidence to happen on a Big Bang accident universe, that everything is just spinning around in space randomly. How come there's these two brilliant lights in the sky that pass each other and they're perfectly opposite? Do you know the sun's light is very different than the moon's light too? They claim the moon's light comes from the sun. It's reflected off of the sun. But if you collect the moon's light, it's actually cold. Whereas if you collect sunlight, of course, it's hot and you can burn things. The sunlight will preserve certain things, dry out meats and things to eat. But if you leave meats out in the moonlight, they spoil. If you're in the shade in the sunlight, the shade is obviously the temperature is going to be less. But if you're in the shade in the moonlight, the temperature is more. The moonlight is cold.
I've never noticed that. I'm going to try that out.
Yeah. The combustion in a bonfire is increased by moonlight, and it's decreased by sunlight. There's another one. So there's a lot of things that prove that the sun and the moon are actually their own lights. They're not, the moon is not a big ball up there in space that you can land masons on, as they claim. It's just a light, a flat, round disk. And you can even see through the moon during waxing and waning cycles. The Royal Astronomical Society, even the people who are part of this manipulation, they've recorded several times that you can see stars and planets through the moon. And the astronomers that are seeing it, they're always flabbergasted about how this is possible. But it's because the moon is not physical. It's not densely physical in the way that they claim. It's just a light, so you can see through it. Just like the planets as well are just lights. That's why Pluto's not a planet anymore, because the light from it just rapidly diminished one day, and they couldn't continue fooling all the amateur astronomers that Pluto's a planet, because the starlight from it just diminished by 50%.
I think that moon thing is pretty compelling. I am going to tonight see if that's true. I've never noticed that effect. I've never looked for that effect. But to think that if I get into the shade of the moon and that the moon is giving off its own light, I mean, that is pretty radically different. And I like those kind of challenges. So I'm going to try to see how that works. But I'm surprised more people haven't stumbled upon that. If the moon is giving off a cold light, I guess we just assume it's the absence of sunlight, but to shade yourself from that and be warmer,
Interesting indeed, isn't it?
It is. I don't know, man. This is about as far out as it gets, and it's super awesome. So, thanks for being here. We covered so much ground. I think we made a pretty good, complete case for at least the proponents of the flat earth. I think they would be proud of the interview we did today. But, if there are still skeptics out there that are resistant to this idea, is there anything else before we wrap this up that we should mention as icing on the flat earth cake or anything?
Yeah, I recommend everybody look into it, do your own research, and check out my website, atlanticconspiracy.com. My book and documentary is free on YouTube, The Flat Earth Conspiracy, and I've just restarted the International Flat Earth Research Society. You can come see some of the message board stuff we're doing over there at ifers.boards.net.
Perfect, man. And I did want to mention also real quick, for people who are going to go look this stuff up, you might want to avoid the Flat Earth Society, because they seem to be controlled opposition. You have a post about that, how the Flat Earth Society, the official group, they purposely sound crazy. They purposely don't answer things correctly. And when you trace back some of the people who are involved, they are Masons as well. So it seems like they might have this group set up to look stupid. Maybe avoid that.
Exactly. The Flat Earth Society was set up after the International Flat Earth Research Society was set up as the controlled opposition to bring people away from that society. Charles K. Johnson, who ran that society, he had his house burned down and all of his flat earth material was burned in the fire, and he claimed to his dying day that it was done by a NASA agent who also tried to murder him. And so, the Flat Earth Society, what they do is they mix a bunch of false flat earth arguments in, so that people who are considering the flat earth and trying to research it, they'll instantly come upon the Flat Earth Society material because it's at the top of all the search engines, and they'll have false arguments like, instead of saying that gravity doesn't exist, as we got into a little bit, they'll say gravity exists, but it's explained by the flat earth disk constantly rising up 9.8 meters per second. And so, you can imagine, instead of you falling, the flat earth is rising up, and that's what happened.
Right.
But again, this is a silly argument. If that was the case, then sustained flight would be impossible, and the flat earth would be rising up into planes and helicopters and stuff, crashing into them. So they present an easily refutable argument like this, and then well-meaning researchers trying to look into the flat earth find their frequently asked questions that has these bad answers, and then they just think, oh, well, this is ridiculous. And they also they make the whole thing into this big satire, and they address it cynically. So if you read some of their threads, they don't keep a serious research kind of attitude. They're always off the cuff, trying to be be witty and funny all the time. So the whole thing is just made into a mockery.
Yeah.
They even made a mockumentary called In Search of the Edge, and they'd show it to people in public schools. They'd show it to kids, and then afterwards they'd ask them if they believed it. And then if the kids believed it, they'd then give these worksheets showing why it was wrong and that the Earth definitely isn't flat, and here's why, and then they'd start a big Ball Earth unit based on it. So the Flat Earth Society has been involved in these kind of fake Flat Earth arguments and documentaries and everything from the get-go up until today. So so steer clear of the Flat Earth Society and come on over to the International Flat Earth Research Society.
Yeah, just like Alex Jones makes conspiracy theorists seem crazy, they have an organization set up to make flat earthers seem crazy. So it's definitely worth a mention, because I didn't want people to go there and then get turned off. Like you said, it's usually the first thing they see. So Atlanteanconspiracy.com. Check out Eric's awesome YouTube page that's got tons of this stuff that has made me question a lot of things I thought I knew. But thanks so much, man. You really have changed my impression of flat earthers, even if I might not have become one myself quite yet overnight. I love the fringe ideas like this. I just didn't think there was a real argument there, and now I think there could be. So keep doing what you do and take care of yourself out there, man.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it. It was a good interview.